Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual cognitive behavior and neurolinguistic programming practitioner specializing in anger management issues, both court-appointed and private, marriage and relationship coaching, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found on lifecoach.drdanpodcast.com. Today, I'm very excited to have our second episode of season 32, a very special guest and someone having dealt with alcohol and drug addiction throughout a big part of their life, Mr. Patrick Casey Jr., and just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dr. Dan. I appreciate you having me on and being, exposed to your audience and being able to share the story of recovery and addiction. So I work now as a nurse practitioner. I actually work in substance abuse, treating people who are in the place that I once was a long time ago in, struggling with drug and alcohol and mental health disorders, which I know you do the same thing with from the therapy side. So I basically what happened was I got clean at 19 years old. I had been shooting heroin for about a year and a half, though if you look back, I started, with marijuana, cigarettes about the age of 10, 11 years old, drinking alcohol, and it just naturally progressed to getting into the very deep, dark, bad stuff. And so what happened was I was my parents came home one night and found me passed out on the couch, heroin, needle, spoon, everything. And I was, instructed to watch my two younger sisters while they went to their typical bowling league on Friday nights. So here I am, the oldest of three kids, babysitting, supposed to be a responsible one. And this is how they come home to find their son, thought I was dead. I woke into my dad violently shaking me awake, my mom's hollering and screaming in the background. And it's just like a really terrible nightmare for everybody involved. And I woke up the next morning, Dr. Dan, and I'm sitting there going, man, did that happen last night? Like this doesn't seem real. I'm looking around for my stash, can't find it, and it hits me. Holy crap, that really happened last night. And so I go downstairs and my mom's on the landline, and this is in August of 2002. She's on the landline in the kitchen talking to treatment centers. And as I go walking down the stairs, and you may have had this experience, or maybe many patients that you've helped in the past, but I had this immense relief, like this weight taken off my shoulders of like, finally, I'm getting help. Because I had been trying, Dr. Dan, for about 6 months to kind of find a way, like, how can I soften the blow, tell my parents I have this trouble. I didn't want to tell them I was using heroin. Do I tell them the drinking's worse than they thought, that maybe I have an addiction to pills? So I was trying to find a way, right? And so I think I kind of manifested this to happen because I've been wanting to get help for so long that it all culminated in this really horrible night that ended up being the best thing that ever happened in my life. And, they're obviously extremely proud of me today. And I have a very close, tight relationship with my family, which, wasn't the case before this happened.
That is amazing. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, for being here today, and especially to share your own experience, because I know that a lot of people may be ashamed of what happened in their past, but you're using this experience to be able to help others, and you've actually put it into a practice and helping people on how to deal with addiction, etc. So,
Mm.
I mean, kudos to you, Patrick. Honestly, this is definitely a very interesting journey that you went through. And so today, this is the purpose, is to be able to encourage, inspire our listeners that addiction is not the end game. It's basically something that propels us to become a better version of ourselves. And sometimes we have to learn from difficult, I would say, decision that we make in our lives. And I think you did the same. But if we could just go back a little bit into the past, let's jump together into the DeLorean time machine from Back to the Future
Of
and
course.
figure out what brought you to addiction at such a young age. Because at 11 years old, I mean, most kids are just still playing with video games, and some others keep playing video games until their 50s. But what brought you to do that? I mean, what kind of traumatic experience did you have to deal with for you to be able to have some kind of desire to start drinking?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Because I'm 42 years old now. My youngest sister, she's the only one of the three of us who has kids, and so I look at my niece, my nephews, and they're all around those ages, from 4 to 14, and I'm like, wow, I can't imagine like looking at these kids. I can't imagine him smoking marijuana, drinking alcohol when I see them just fun, jovial kids. So both of my parents have had struggles with alcohol. Neither of them would admit that they're alcoholic. They, you could call them functional. They ended up divorcing when I was in my 20s, my early 20s. So once my youngest sister turned 18, my parents got divorced, and I think alcohol was a big part of that wedge that drove them apart, and depression and fighting. But I grew up as the oldest, and I grew up just kind of the best way I could classify my childhood, I would say insecure. I had an insecure, confused childhood because, Dr. Dan, I'd get up in the morning, I would kind of like tiptoe to the kitchen, kind of like gauging the temperature of the room, like, what kind of mood is mom in today? What kind of, facial expressions does my dad have right now? And so I kind of learned how to like tiptoe, tap dance around things, manipulate, lie, just to kind of avoid conflict. I mean, my parents would fight, and this wasn't like all the time, but there was fighting, there was violence. I got my rear end handed to me all the time. I was always in trouble, always getting grounded, always getting beaten. And then like I would have this horrible physical abuse, and then moments later, my mom would come down, come back in the room, be loving, gentle, remorseful, but then it would happen again. It might be the next day, it might be the next week, right? So I had this very confused, like, I don't know what to expect. And I was in trouble all the time. I was the kid, I was the kid, Dr. Dan, that in school, in grade school especially, I always sat next to the teacher's desk in the front of the class. I was always in trouble. I always had to like dust the erasers, write on the chalkboard because I was always in trouble, looking and seeking attention. And I think it was just natural progression that I eventually was going to turn to something to numb my pain, not knowing that's what I was doing. I had no fear. I was like, I saw other people doing this stuff, and I was like, I want to do that because I guess maybe no attention or maybe any attention is better than no attention, right?
Absolutely, you're right. Now, the thing is, you just said something about numbing your feelings, but even though you said that you had two younger sister, were they also affected by the toxic environment that all of you were living in with your
Yes.
parents? Okay, so did they end up also drinking or using drugs?
So they had their phases, I guess you could call it, but no, I mean, my youngest sister barely ever drinks. My other sisters, she likes to have a glass of wine here and there, but no, neither of my sisters turned out to be, what you would call addicts, alcoholics. Now they have, as you know, I'm sure better than I do, even with the family dynamics, my middle sister, she's the caretaker, the big people pleaser, keeping the peace. My youngest sister, she's, the only child syndrome. So or not only child, but youngest child. So she has a lot of those. So they all have kind of their isms and defects that come from being in the same environment. It just for them, it didn't come in a destructive way of putting poison in their bodies.
I see. So, do you think then at this point, physiologically speaking, would you consider because you were the oldest and you had the most amount of responsibilities, so you had to find an escape?
Yeah, it's hard to say. It's kind of like I paved the way because, my parents were, not terribly young. I think my mom was like 21 when she had me, and my dad was 23, and I was the oldest. So I was kind of like the guinea pig, I say. Like they kind of just were fumbling through it, figuring things out. But I don't know. I think I kind of paved the way for my sisters to kind of like know what not to do in a lot of regards. But I'm not exactly sure why, because I always played sports. I always had a lot of friends. We always had friends over at the house, sleepovers. I always kind of like was the organizer, coordinating the sports games, street hockey, football. I always played sports. My dad even coached like my soccer teams, baseball. So I never had like this loneliness or felt like I was different from people. That happened, I think, when I got to about high school, but grade school, middle school, I never had that feeling. But for some reason, I don't know what it was. There's just some kind of need to have to escape. And it must have been because of maybe because I was more aware of it. You could say, Dr. Dan, I was more aware of what was going on in the house than my sisters because I'm 4 years older than the middle sister and 6 years older than the youngest. So maybe, do you think maybe that played a part in it?
Well, it's a very interesting question because also based on what you said, it could be related to generational trauma. Because if your grandparents also had very similar issues and your parents followed through as well, then that caused this to continue on. And
Yes.
if let's say, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what was your relationship with your grandparents, either on either side, either your father or your mother, but did they also experience something similar?
Yeah, so I came to find out later in my adult life, my mom had a very similar abusive relationship with her father, my grandfather. He just passed away a few years ago. He was a World War II veteran, really great guy, but just, older Italian guy, very scrappy, old school. Um, he would do things like just violent outbursts, I guess. And they were Italian Catholic family, so there was, I think, 6 or 7 kids. My mom was like the second to the youngest, second or third to the youngest. So for whatever reason, the way they always described it was that my mom and my papa always butted heads. And then me, it was always me and my mom butted heads. I think it was that whole thing, which you probably know this. I think it's just like you're too much alike. You have two stubborn, like-minded, strong-willed people, and so they butt heads. And so I would butt heads with my mom more than my two younger sisters, and she would butt heads with her dad more than probably the majority of her siblings.
What I think by you saying this, Patrick, is that what caused all this to happen is since your parents were very young when they actually had you, and then throughout the years they were learning as they go with how to raise you, etc. They
Hmm.
felt left out when the two other kids came along. So for you to be able to regain some kind of attention from your parents, this is the reason why you went into using alcohol or drugs, is because
Yeah.
you felt left out. And
Wow.
that in itself causes you to be able to kind of try to regain some form of attention by acting this way or by just being the black sheep of the family.
Yeah, I agree. I like that. That's very good insight.
Okay, so but the thing is that I'm the middle child from I have an older brother who's 2 years older, and I have a younger sister who's actually 6 years younger. Now, yeah, my father always wanted to have a daughter, so obviously when the last one came along, he did put a lot of attention, but also he distributed to his best of his ability the same love and affection to me and my brother. But at the same time, because my sister is the youngest, I mean, pretty young compared to us.
Hmm.
It kind of like put a lot more attention on her. So yes, my brother and I, we did deal with a very strict upbringing, but my sister was more lenient because my parents realized that, oh, I think we were very tough with the two boys. Let's just be more gentle with my sister. So
Yeah,
in a way, it kind of like, oh, so we got all the shit.
exactly.
Treatment. I guess it kind of like changed completely the dynamic of the relationship. But I got like I was closer to my sister obviously because we have less years in gap than my brother. But at the same time, it's kind of like we still have a very loving dynamic.
Cool. I like that. Yeah, and we're all very close too. And I think sometimes like the common traumas kind of bind us together too. Like me and my sisters all had the same experience where, the paddle was kept under the bed, and if we got in trouble, we had to get the paddle out, and we would get a spanking, and if we tried to, put our hands over our rear end, our back to block it, it was like, oh, there's going to be two more now. So we all had kind of that same fear kind of like instilled in us, and I think that kind of an unfortunate way kind of bonded us together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does that. It's through a very difficult experience that it allows us to be able to look at our life, especially now when we see so many addiction out there and how people actually try to drown or numb their feelings into something that they have to become codependent on. Because
Yes.
we're lucky. I mean, when we're talking about heroin, which is pretty harsh drug, such as crack and all the others, um, it's getting out of it is extremely difficult, especially with people that I've dealt with. They have an immense struggle to be able to kind of like put it at bay and not having to revisit those moments. So, what kind of strategies have you used, Patrick, to be able to kind of like go cold turkey and just stop, or was it a gradual amount of or lesser amount of drug that you were using so you could easily transition to going completely clean?
So it was a little more difficult back then in August of 2002. It's not like now, like, I treat people with Suboxone who are coming off of heroin, fentanyl, other opioids. So you can do that where you kind of gradually come off. Back then, it wasn't really as readily used. I think methadone was probably more so the trick, but that was really for maintenance to keep people on. So I actually took diazepam, a benzodiazepine, for a couple of days at home, and that was because what I would do was there was a woman I worked with at the restaurant. She would get a prescription of diazepam every month, and I would buy weed all the time. And she really liked weed, really liked weed. So I would trade with her. I would trade her weed for, a good supply of her medication. And I would do that because, like I said, over the last 6 months of my use, I was trying to get clean. So I would detox myself, taper myself for a few days, a week. But like you gave voice to, I would always go back to it. So this last time when my parents caught me, sent me off to treatment, I did take the benzodiazepines for a couple of days. Then I went to treatment, but I was still pretty sick. But they didn't deem me to be sick enough to go to the detox ward, so I went straight into the residential section of it. So I pretty much just kicked it almost cold turkey. And I mean, I barely slept for about 30 days. The first 30 days there, they tried a couple different sleep meds and nothing really worked. It just made me feel like crap. So I pretty much kicked it cold turkey. And that was probably the best thing if you can think about it, to really burn into my subconscious that I never in my life want to go through this again. And I'm only 19 years old and I never want to experience that again. And so I think that really helped burn it into my consciousness. But then as you can imagine, being, doing group therapies, one-on-one therapy, stuff that I had never experienced before I went to this treatment center. I didn't know about talking about feelings. I always felt like I was the only one that had these insecurities and felt awkward and, had these skeletons in the closet that nobody else did or would understand. And so here I am with these like-minded people going through the same process. And then I get introduced to going to 12-step meetings, and that just really lit me up and really opened up a whole new avenue for me to be a different and better person. And so that's something I've done my entire recovery as well, is stay active in 12-step meetings as well in recovery. And I like it. It's something that I can do to pass on to other people to help them with their addictions. And I know it's not the only way, but it is something that has worked for me. But I also tell people who I treat in the treatment centers, look, there's no monopoly, there's no one way to do this. And I just try to encourage them because I get so many people that relapse and come back, and you gave voice to it too. It's always trying to help them pinpoint what is the thing that you're numbing, what is the thing that you're not wanting to look at, what is the thing that you don't want to face or that's triggering you so bad. Why are you in such a hurry to go back home to the same environment that continues to kind of set you off? And a lot of people, as you know, are kind of in that victim mentality where they don't take responsibility for themselves. They don't take the power back. And so they allow their recovery to be dependent on people, places, and things, right? Instead of taking ownership of that. So it's really sad. Aside from just treating them with medications and medical stuff, I always try to encourage them that, like, look, we need to find out what these core wounds are and pull these up. We need to rewire your brain. We need to rewire those synapses, and you need to be away and off the substances long enough for your brain to even heal. It's 20 miles into the woods. Sometimes it's 20 miles out. You can't do a lifetime or a decade of addiction and come to treatment for a week or even a month and expect you're going to be all perfect now, right?
Exactly. I mean, I guess
So
they feel that they want to get out of this pain as soon as possible, but at the same time, if it takes you like a year to be able to gain 100 pounds, don't expect to lose it in 1 week.
exactly. Exactly. There's no quick fix for this stuff. And I always tell them, look, it's if it was easy, everybody would do it. But
Yeah.
it's not. You have to go through it. It's a roller coaster. And I was telling them it's going to smooth out a little bit over time. It's going to smooth out more and more. But you got to be willing to go through the hard times, and you have to be willing to sit still and embrace the feelings. Because, like me, before I got into recovery, I didn't know what it was like to have feelings. I didn't know it was okay to have feelings. And so I learned how to wrap my arms around the feelings and just embrace them and remind myself that nobody ever died from having a feeling. It was never on an autopsy report, so and so died from such and such feeling. Like the feelings aren't going to kill you. It's what we do with those feelings that ends up wrecking our lives. So just sit with the feelings, embrace them, know that it's going to pass, and then try to figure out, how do I make this better moving forward?
It's interesting that you say this right now in terms of those feelings, because when it comes to, this is a little bit out of the subject of addiction, etc. Well, in a way, you know what? It can be very similar when we talk about codependency
Yeah, yeah, of course.
in relationships. So when do people can die from heartbreak? And that's actually a question that I get a lot from some of my patients to say, well, especially those who are going through very, very difficult marriages or relationships. And when it comes to them having to deal with the loss or the demise of their marriage or anything like that, and then they become lonely because come to think of it, when a divorce happens, the men get the brunt of that divorce. I mean, because they're being they lose basically most of everything. They maybe depending on if they have kids or not. The kids are with the mother, so they are alone, and being alone creates this kind of environment that can become extremely toxic, and
Yeah.
that in itself, this loneliness brings depression. Depression can have suicidal ideation. So in a way, can heartbreak cause like instability.
Yeah, yeah. Because isn't there it's called broken heart syndrome? I've heard that term tossed around a lot. I don't know if that's a classified diagnosis, but I've heard people say, "Oh, you have broken heart syndrome," and you know as well as I do, a lot of so many medical issues, chronic immune, back pain, neck pain, so many things can be tied to emotional stress, stuffed feelings, unprocessed, um, you know, grief, trauma, et cetera, right? Like I call it, instead of, we always say depression, sometimes you could use the word repression. It's
Mhm.
repressed emotions, repressed feelings. And so it's like, yeah, no wonder you have stomach issues. You can't eat, you have bloating, you have back pain, headaches all the time. And then what I see and have experienced myself firsthand, when I clean out some of this garbage out from inside of me and I get this stuff out and process it and look at it and work through it, all of a sudden magically a lot of these aches and pains and things that I never thought were going to go away, or I couldn't really put a organic diagnosis to it, they start to just kind of go away or at least get a lot better. And then what happens? I get stressful again and start taking own, control back of everything and start messing things up. And some of those issues start to come back again.
Mhm.
And so a lot of it is so self-inflicted and I've seen so many medical issues and diagnoses get better, cancers even, right? That get better by turning to a spiritual path or at least an emotional cleansing.
So when it comes to helping people with those with the addiction, either drug or alcohol, I mean, everyone is built differently. Some people, your strategies may work or may not work.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a common denominator, a common approach that can work for everyone, beside of course going to attend AA meeting or a substance abuse meeting,
Mhm.
etc. Is there another thing that you could share with our listeners about kind of like a quick step by step? And I know it's nothing quick because
Yeah.
that will take years to be able to recover from. But is there something that they can start with? At least take something out of this podcast.
Yeah, I would say looking at trying to analyze and figure out where did this stem from, because I tell people all the time, at least my belief, I don't think you're born with anxiety. I don't think we're born with depression. Possibly we're not born with addiction, even though, some of these things can all be traced back to genetics. But are those genetics maybe environmental, like learned behaviors, and that's why we then replicate those as we get older? So I don't know. But I think the majority of it is, where is this stemming from? What is it, again, like we said a while ago, what is it that I'm trying to escape or numb? And then what are some other healthy things that I can do? Could I exercise more? Could I eat better? Could I, start listening to more positive things? Could I start reading more positive books, right? Do I stop watching the god awful news every day with all this negativity? Do I start reading, listening to podcasts like yours? Do I start listening to all the positive stuff, right? Because I become what I feed myself, right? So if I'm feeding myself all this good stuff, I start getting on this more positive vibration, and I put positive vibrations out into the world. And what happens? I get a lot more positive things back than I do negative. And so again, it's getting out of that victim mentality where it's like everybody's so mean to me and everybody's so bad. It's like, well, when I sit down and I get honest and think about it, it's like, well, a lot of times I am the common denominator, and so there's something going wrong. And so if I'm not the problem, then I'm kind of screwed because at least if I'm the problem, I can do something. Because if you're the problem, Dr. Dan, I can't do anything about that, right? Because
Correct.
you have your power. I don't have any power over Dr. Dan. I don't have any power over my wife or my boss. So what is it that I can do to reshape my life? Maybe I just have to make a whole bunch of changes. And so I find a lot of times making a pros and cons list is also a very helpful thing for me. If I'm trying to decide what direction to go with something, I make a list of all the pros and a list of all the cons, and then I have right there in black and white in my own handwriting the answer if I'm honest about it.
hmm But again, it's all, like I said, I read a lot and I learned a lot about the philosophy of Stoicism, in which it helped us or it can help anyone understand the things that they could really control from within themselves. And like you said about the victim mentality, that, oh, people hate me, people do this, or I'm victim of circumstances that I can control. This is incorrect. We can control every decision we make, but
Yes.
we have the unfortunate, I would say, habit of self-criticizing ourselves.
Oh
And
yeah.
itself, we feel like we're never good enough because we tend to compare ourselves with people that we see online on social media. And when we see people living a better life than ours, then we build kind of like, well, why did they deserve this and not us? But the
Mhm.
reality here, Patrick, is that 89% or 94% of the things that we see online is fake anyway. So why would you like to compare yourself with fakeness?
That's right. That's right. And it's all jealousy. And like you said, it's not coming from anywhere. And this is a good segue because, what happened to me was back in 2022, I was, almost 20 years sober. And I had hit another rock bottom again, this time an emotional, spiritual bottom. And I wasn't even aware of it, not even completely clueless. I was looking back. Yeah, everything you said. I was talking mean to myself. I was always negative. I was trying to control everything. And I came to find out, even though I don't have this addiction to drugs and alcohol anymore, I have an addiction to control. I want to
Mm,
control everything, how many patients I see, for how long I see, the traffic getting to and from each facility. I want to control my wife. I want to control the way, my soccer game goes, my tennis. Like I want to control every aspect of everything. And it's exhausted. It's absolutely exhausted, right? And so, and I know we have to wrap up soon. So what happened was I my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, was listening to a podcaster, and she was working with this life coach lady out in California, and we live in South Florida. And she said, "Hey, I'm going to go to this live event in Southern California. Would you come with me? Because I'm kind of shy and stuff." I'm like, "Yeah, no problem, babe. I'll come. I'll check it out." And I'm open-minded, been in recovery for a while. Maybe I'll get something out of it too. And phew, Dr. Day, I can't even tell you, I got cracked wide open in front of this group of 40 plus people I'd never known. And we're passing the microphone around on a Sunday afternoon as the weekend's winding down, and we're talking about what we got out of the weekend. And I'm holding the microphone, and Caitlin, my girlfriend, my wife, sitting next to me, and I look over at her and I say, I want to love myself like you love me.
mm,
And I know that I can't really love you the way that you deserve until I love myself. And I just
right.
broke down, man. I don't even know where that came from. It was just this total revelation I had. And I'm like, in one hand frustrated. I'm like, okay, I'm 20 years sober. I'm like, 38, 39 years old. I got, I live in Jupiter, Florida by the beach. I got a nice car, nice house, good income, good career, so many friends. I'm healthy, I'm fit. We do all these things. I'm like, how can I still feel like this broken child? Like, what
Yeah.
is that about? And it was like, oh, well, guess what? You've kind of acknowledged what some of the wounds are and stuff, but you still haven't really worked through them completely. And I was like, shoot, man, like, God, I got to do some more work again. And
Yeah.
so I got busy, man, and I started working with this life coach, and she just completely changed everything. And so I got into, trying to do some life coaching too, because I figured, I want to be able to help other men that are not just struggling with addiction, because that's what I've been doing my whole adult life. I was like, what about the common day man who doesn't have addiction but struggles with being vulnerable or struggles with relationships or struggles with just like not being quite where he wants to be. So
Absolutely.
I've been trying to kind of dive into that for the last couple of years.
That's amazing. So before we end the podcast, how can people find you, Patrick?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at Patrick Casey Jr. So it's Patrick CASEYJR, and uh patrickcaseyjr.com is probably the easiest. If you just go to patrickcaseyjr.com, I have a website there. I have a couple free online courses that I did. I have a link there to a YouTube channel with, however 20 plus podcast episodes I've been on that are on there. My website, you can check things out for free. I give some resources for stuff that I found very helpful for me because I really, so I was married once before, Dr. Dan, and it was a 10-year relationship, and it just didn't end, the way that you plan when you get married.
Mhm.
And I kind of vowed not to repeat that again. So I did remarry earlier this year, and we've been together for 8 years, and God bless her, she was patient with me because I wasn't in a big hurry to get married again. But anyways, I learned a lot about masculinity, femininity, energy, and all those things that really like why, because I wanted to figure out why did this relationship go sour, and I was able to look and honestly say like I played a gigantic role in being complacent and not
Oh,
not not being a lover anymore. So
absolutely. I mean, we always have to be accountable for the mistake that we've done, and this is definitely a good way to learn it. But on that note, Patrick, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. And again, thank you sincerely for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And we all appreciate your participation to this episode by sharing your personal journey with drug and alcohol addiction and productive ways to overcome this codependency by uncovering core wounds that can affect your life long term. Now, to our millions of listeners out there, we hope that you've enjoyed today's episode as much as we did. And also, we're very excited for what's ahead in season 32 of the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, featuring a lineup of incredible guests with powerful stories that will continue to uplift and inspire all of you. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Uncovering our core wounds is one of the most powerful steps we can take towards true healing and lasting freedom. When we understand the deeper pain beneath our behaviors, we no longer feel the need to numb it with drugs, alcohol, or self-destructive habits. Awareness brings clarity, and clarity opens the door to healthier choices and genuine transformation. By facing what hurts, we reclaim our power and begin to rewrite the story of our lives. This process not only improves our emotional well being, but also strengthens our resilience, self worth, and inner peace. Healing our wounds is ultimately how we protect our future and create a life we no longer need to escape from. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.